Hey everyone, welcome to Inventing Construction. I'm Ross Griffin. Today's topic is MMC. Is it really modern? And MMC being modern methods of construction. The four subtopics are: what is MMC? Why is there such a focus on MMC now? What are the advantages of MMC? And what needs to change or be improved for MMC to succeed? We're in Ireland today, in Dublin, recording some of our sessions. So it's the boy band on tour. Is that what we're looking at? Is that what we're calling ourselves? Yeah, okay. Boy band on tour. The guys will come up with a Danish name later. We'll come back to that. But today we got Pat Kirwan with us. And Pat, I'm not going to introduce you, Pat. You introduce yourself, perhaps, you know, who you are, what you're doing, what we're doing here, perhaps, as well.
Sure. A director in C&W O'Brien Architects, also co-founder and board member with MMC Ireland. And I'm also sitting on the RIAI Council and co-authored the DfMA guide to integrating MMC within the construction sector. And hopefully we can have a good chat on MMC throughout the next period.
The thing about it, I find about the Irish construction industry is all the acronyms. So we're going to have to explain a lot of these as well for our international listeners as we go through our conversation. But today's topic for everyone is going to be MMC. Is it really modern? And MMC is modern methods of construction. And it's a terminology that has really grown some legs here in the Irish industry, and I think in the UK industry as well. But it might not be as common in the international industry. So we'll get into some of the detailing around that today. But our four subtopics is: what is MMC? Yeah, we'll describe what that is, and so people get a good understanding. Why is it such a focus point, especially now, in kind of this day and age? And what are the advantages of MMC within the construction industry, the supply chain, for the stakeholder groups? And what needs to change or be improved for MMC to be successful? But I guess, Pat, we'll jump on to the first one. Explain to us, what is MMC, this acronym MMC?
Well, as you outlined at the start, MMC is modern methods of construction. I guess you could argue that it's not necessarily modern.
Yeah.
It's a new acronym, it's a new term. Prefabrication, offsite construction, all of that is kind under MMC. You know, MMC pretty much has been around for quite a while.
Yeah.
You know, when we look at prefabrication, either be it timber or concrete, precast concrete, etc. I think where really it's the terminology where it's coming from is the UK. I think the UK government defined out a structure to look at MMC and came up with the term MMC and looked at a categorization of category 1, category 2, etc. And I think, you know, we're particularly here in Ireland, we're so interlinked with the UK to a certain degree, you know, that we have that and we bring that on board. And we can look at MMC actually as in a number of different ways. One way actually I look at it would be 1D, 2D and 3D. You know, and if we kind of reference that back to perhaps BIM as well in a sense, you know, where you get 1D could be prefabricated concrete columns or beams, etc. You know, 2D then could be 2D panelized construction.
Facades, for example.
Exactly. Or a timber frame panel. And you can look at those then, you can break those down into either open cell or closed cell. So, you know, a closed cell would be a 2D panelized structure with a facade integrated, and you just drop those panels.
Twin wall construction, for example, with external facade and internal wall.
Exactly. And then open cell for, you know, it could be prefabricated timber panel, and then you put all of your facade elements on that. And then obviously we get into 3D, where we have, you know, you can break it down again into subcategories where you might be 3D volumetric structural. So, you know, the actual 3D element provides the structure of the building, that would be 3D volumetric modular. And then you get into non-structural components, which could be bathroom pods, 3D bathroom pods, for example.
Internal mechanical electrical systems in units like pumping and so on, and ventilation systems, etc.
Exactly. You know, and I think actually here in Ireland, we have been using modern methods of construction to a certain degree for a long time, you know, and actually one of the very first usages, I guess, would have been actually close enough to where we are today, the Ballymun Towers.
Oh yeah.
So, they would have used the Danish construction methodology, precast concrete elements. And, that was back a number of years ago. So again, we've been integrating that for quite a while. And I think it's just this new terminology now that's coming aboard, modern methods of construction, etc.
Now, it's interesting. For me, modern methods of construction has to be modern in some sense. So when we talk about it, and we talk about precast elements and modular components like timber, I'm going, how is that modern? We've been doing that for decades now. And especially coming from the Danish construction industry, precast elements is the standard. It's not modern in any way, shape or form. But I think the volumetric stuff is where I feel we come into the modern construction. Your apartment pods, your hotel room pods, that entire construction just being lifted into place, the off-site manufacturing component of that, whether you could talk about the bathroom pods or the hotel room pods, and also the mechanical and electrical, getting into the data center industry and the pharmaceutical industry when we talk about ventilation or electrical equipment or whatever the case may be. That for me is modern. But the precast element and the 2D and 1D, as you mentioned, we've been doing that for such a long time now.
Exactly. But you can also bring in, under modern methods construction, particularly the categories that were defined out by the UK government. We have actual new modern methods under their 3D printed concrete, for example. Yeah, we can then get into the digital workflows, on-site digital, VR or whatever it may be. Again, they are more modern. And then you have, I guess, elements that speed up construction on site, not necessarily fully prefabricated. For example, it could be brick slip systems where you're still kind of assembling them almost component on site, but they do speed up construction.
Yeah, you're moving away from the traditional methods then into this more kind of pre-manufactured with purpose, if you like the brick slips. Very interesting. So modern methods of construction is a mix of traditional, we guess, and some modern processes and approaches to how we construct, rather than your traditional extension, which is your cavity wall on a block with lintel with timber flat roof or a roof or whatever.
Exactly. So it's essentially it's moving away from assembling and manufacturing to a certain degree on site, prefabricating on off site. Bringing all that and then assembling them in greater pieces on site.
It makes a lot of sense from the outside looking in, going, why aren't we doing this already? How come we're not approaching construction from a manufacturing perspective and manufacturing all our elements and speeding up this way of building, if you like? Why is there such a focus on MMC now? Why now? Why not 10 years ago? Why not 20 years ago?
I think actually we had a good focus on MMC to a certain degree, certainly back in the Celtic Tiger days, if we look at timber frame construction was used quite a lot. Back in 2005, 2006, there was a lot of discussion in regards to integrating it to a higher degree in terms of, higher construction. There were certain limits put on the usage in terms of fire, over 10, 15 meters, etc. I think now really we're beginning to look at it, and particularly at governmental level, and it comes under the Housing for All strategy by the government, that we see it now, we begin to see, and we acknowledge and we're more aware of the benefits of MMC, be it, particularly in terms of productivity, increasing speed on site. And obviously, we have a severe housing shortage. So if we have new methods of construction that would help speed up the delivery of housing, well, why not use those? So I think, there's a greater emphasis and focus, particularly on MMC in the residential sector. MMC, again, in various categories, have been used for quite some while in different areas, like say data centers, obviously, streets ahead in terms of residential, but we're now beginning to see that. And it is, the level of maturity is there to a certain degree.
You look at the international market, I guess, a lot of countries are doing this already. But so is it necessity that is forcing us now to focus on MMC? If we didn't have a housing crisis in Ireland, for example, similar to the UK, with housing shortage, if we didn't have that and the numbers were stable, would we be still looking at efficiencies, do you think, in construction methodology? Or is it just the necessity is forcing us to look that way?
At the moment, it's a necessity. And I think it's not just, we also have skill shortages. I think there's a report this week in regards to, the shortage of skilled labour on sites. And obviously MMC, has its advantages in that sense. I think if we were to say that actually, we're now outputting the levels of housing that we need, even if we're ahead of those, I think even, the other advantages of MMC would really come into play in terms of carbon. That we have a climate action plan, that we need to reduce carbon emissions within the construction industry significantly. And actually, I think within the residential sector, we have to reduce them by about 42%, by 2030. And that's a significant undertaking. So, the benefit of carbon reduction through prefabrication, offsite optimization of material usage, logistics, etc. And I think they would be perhaps a more of an emphasis on the sustainable aspects of MMC. And I think that's something that we really need to bring to fore. And I know particularly MMC Ireland, we're now beginning to really articulate those and drive those forward, and not just focus on the productivity benefits.
We're a small island in the Atlantic off the west coast of Europe. Do we have the manufacturing facilities on the island to facilitate the high volume of MMC needed? Or what's the strategy here then?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we have some fantastic manufacturers here. We have, it depends on the category of MMC that we're talking about. So if we're looking at 2D panelers, we have companies like Glenveagh, Newer Manufacturing, who are opening manufacturing plants and outputting high levels, high quality and high levels of housing output through MMC. If we get into 3D volumetric modular, sure, I don't think at the current present time we have the capacity to deliver, quite large volumes. But again, it's, as I see it, it's almost like a chicken and egg scenario.
Who goes first?
Who goes first? And how can we make sure that we have a pipeline of work for manufacturers, because it's a significant undertaking to set up a manufacturing factory, etc.
But surely government can take that lead with industry, with the LDA, for example, the Land Development Agency, and the volume that they need to build over the next number of decades. Surely there's a partnership between private and public sectors there to reduce that risk and increase supply.
Yeah, no, and we do have some really good manufacturing facilities. Castle Modular in Galway, doing some really good work, and they've produced some fantastic elements and modules for the Ukrainian homes projects. So they're
quite rapidly as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have other manufacturers coming on board, Modulera, a new manufacturing company that's beginning to get into the Irish market again. So I think there is a good opportunity. I think we need to look at putting steps in place, it's not just investing in companies. I think they have to be looking at through the life cycle of a project, procurement, etc.
Absolutely, it has.
So I think there's a lot of steps that we need to go through before we can just start, really investing in wholesale factories for particularly 3D volumetric modular.
It's interesting because, as the listeners know, I spent an awful lot of time in Denmark, and when I look at residential in Denmark, it's all MMC, it's precast elements. In general, that's the way they build. It's all modular-based design and construct as well. It's very rapid build stuff. Like since 2015, there's been 2 new city quarters built in Copenhagen, for example. Rapid amount of construction happening since then to deal with the need for housing. And then you contrast that with Dublin, for example, similar sized cities, similar sized population, and the time it's taking us to get to that volume of construction here, it's just not quick enough, I guess. And hopefully MMC can help in that. The labour shortages, as you mentioned, are a huge challenge for us and are only going to get worse, because the more housing we build, the more infrastructure we need, the more services we need, the more public services we need. So our construction industry is not just going to grow in housing, it's going to grow in every single sector because of the growing population, right? So the next decade will be an interesting space in MMC.
Absolutely. And I think, when we look at skill shortages, we also have an aging workforce.
Yeah.
And we're probably lagging behind a little bit in terms of getting new apprentices into the industry.
Yeah.
And the boom bust cycle, I think, there's a problem there that it doesn't look appetizing for new entrants coming in,
Indeed.
on-site, hard work, etc., traveling around from site to site. Whereas if we begin to look at MMC and we're kind of moving into prefabrication, factory environments, I think it offers a lot more for the highly skilled worker, the aging workforce to stay on in the industry, further. And then equally, we can bring in diversity, etc. And I think it really integrates all of those elements, and
Absolutely.
I think and really drives forward, and integrating more digital workflows, etc. And that gives more appetizing industry for the youth to come in.
I think that definitely, even from the health and safety perspective, and working in the weathers where storm just passed Ireland there in the last 2 days, and you can imagine what it would be like going out to a construction site on Monday morning after that, the qualities of the industry would vastly increase, I think. So it's a big space, and something that's absolutely necessary. I'm shocked when I look at some of the housing design and apartment design in Ireland, and we still build with, a 300 mil double skin block wall with a cavity with insulation in the middle, very traditional piecemeal construction in massive schemes and such labor intensive work. And then the amount of wet trades that we push through each unit and the drying time it takes to do that, etc., etc. Again, I reflect on the Danes' approach to that with off-site construction, no wet trades. They keep all that to a minimum. The apartment constructions are watertight, super quick, meaning that the drying time is reduced to almost nothing, and they can get the fit out started and finished as soon as possible, So there is an awful lot of work to do in this area, and I do think that it will drive the cost of construction down dramatically, because at the end of the day, our wet trades are expensive. Blockwork, plasters, tilers, etc., etc. They're an expensive solution if we're still building in the same way.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because, we also then need to look at upskilling, because if we're moving and reducing, skills like blockwork and brickwork, where are we going to take those particular skills and bring them in? So again, it's upskilling and a refocus on how the labor, etc., the traditional skills, etc. So I think there's quite a lot to happen in a step-by-step approach, skills, procurement, etc., that we need to look at to bring those higher levels of MMC adoption through the pipeline.
It's a long-term objective then.
Yeah,
it's not a 1 year, 2 year thing. You're not saying by 2025 we'll have it solved, Ross.
Yeah, no, certainly not. And I think that those pieces of the jigsaw are beginning to formulate. They're coming together at the moment. We have some really good initiatives within the Irish industry. We've Construct Innovate in Galway, who are now really driving forward, bringing people together, looking at the skills, the training, formalizing, research strategies around and beginning to articulate the benefits, etc., of MMC. Yeah. We have a new innovation park in Offaly, and again, we're setting up exemplar housing typologies and using various modern methods of construction. They have a good training centre there, and particularly in retrofit, and that's actually another area that MMC can really drive forward in terms of we need to upgrade significant numbers of housing. Yeah. It is obviously more challenging, than new build. For example, individual homeowners.
They're occupied, huh?
You're occupant, you're living in there. And then, if we have large scale housing schemes, can we force everybody to upgrade all at once? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of challenges there. But, I see them as challenges, that's
an
something,
opportunity at the same time,
exactly, that we can really drive forward. So I think, we have some good initiatives, and we just need to come together as an industry and solve the challenges.
So we mentioned a couple of advantages of MMC, speed being one, the quality of material, that delivery. So you're constructing off-site versus on-site in the weather that we're having today, for example. But is there any other advantages of MMC that you can think of or you've come across? We go, absolutely, this is something that brings a whole lot of value to the projects or to the industry, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I touched on it earlier in terms of embodied carbon.
Yeah.
There's a good study carried out recently in the UK with the University of Cambridge, looking at two particular schemes by Tide Construction, large scale tower blocks, full 3D volumetric modular.
All right.
I think they looked at the output was essentially both schemes saved almost 60% on the embodied carbon footprint over and above if they were carried out by traditional construction methods. Yeah. Now, again, you can say, well, how is that? Where did that come from? If you look at a 3D volumetric modular, particularly perhaps a steel frame building, you're reducing the amount of concrete and that structural frame. So you have steel frame, lightweight construction, etc. And then obviously the logistics to a certain degree, in that, you don't
transportation
have concrete trucks traveling, around the clock to site, etc. So I think there's significant benefits there in terms of embodied carbon. And obviously, as an industry, we need to begin to tease that out in terms of what does that look like. And that starts at all stakeholders. So designers, how do we design to ensure that we're minimizing the amount of material usage? Can we lay out, so be it apartments or whatever it may be, housing, optimize the layout so that we're absolutely, critically using the sufficient amount of information that our materials, that we're not actually creating wastage through design, etc. So I think that's something that we need to really, really focus on, and hopefully we can begin to see that through the work that I'm working on through the RIAI, the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, on a DfMA overlay, and then beginning to optimize
DfMA overlay. You're going to have to explain that to me and our listeners now, what that means.
So DfMA is Design for Manufacturing and Assembly. So when we talk about MMC to me is the physical elements of construction, right? So we have all of the physical elements, 3D volumetric modular or 2D panelized. If we don't design initially for those, then we've really lost the opportunity to optimize those. So we need to, at the start of our design process, we need to understand
the strategy, basically.
A strategy. And that's it, essentially, come up with a strategy. And that strategy can be a number of different elements feeding into it. Is 3D volumetric modular suitable for this particular scheme? What's the site like? What's the logistics like? What's the supply chain around it, etc.? What's the cost? What's the timeline? So if we tease all those out at the start of a project, and I mean the start in terms of even conception or
stage zero. Works.
A strategic definition stage, and then we can almost instead of the traditional way where the designers design and they have a design and then that design goes out to the market to construction firms, and then they come back and say, actually, perhaps there might be a different way of building it, and then you go back and you redesign and you have redundancy.
A lot of time wasted there.
Exactly, you have time, you have money, etc. So I think that's DfMA. So you design for manufacturing and assembly. And I'm not just saying, you don't just pick a particular construction methodology. You tease that out.
Which option suits
of all the different, requirements.
But here I have an interesting statement for you, so Pat. You're architect by background in education.
Architectural technologist, yeah.
I hear a lot in the industry about MMC is going to kill the freedom and expressionism of architects in their process of designing buildings, etc., etc. What are you hearing back from the industry when it comes to that, and what's your own opinion?
Yeah, sure, and that's a valid point, and I think that probably is a concern generally in my view. But I think if you're aware and you understand MMC, I think that's far from the truth. I would like to see it where we have mass standardization with mass customization.
Yeah.
So if we move into a kit of parts approach and not just a standardized layout, if we begin to tease out kits of parts and you take all of those kits of parts, can you imagine a Lego piece, when we have all the different standardized Lego components, and we can put those together and create fantastic pieces, whereas that doesn't restrict your freedom of design. Whereas, if we can integrate that MMC kit of parts approach and then drive forward with a design. I'd recently had the opportunity to visit Croydon Towers, Tide Modular. I think it's the tallest and second tallest modular buildings in the world. Fantastic layouts, the facade looked amazing in terms of, it definitely didn't look like a standard modular tower, and I think and that's where your DfMA approach comes through, in terms of understanding, okay, how do we build this? What are the limitations? And then optimizing throughout the entire process.
It's like the motor industry in reality, that when you look at different cars out from the outside, they look differently. That's the design aspect. That's the architecture of a building, right? That's what we see, what most people see, especially if you're not involved in the construction industry. You see the outside of the building. That's the architecture. The component aspect that gets you to that can be anything really, because the skeleton that sits underneath the skin, no one sees. Same with the car manufacturing industry. You look at Audi or Volkswagen or any of the brands under that umbrella, the kit of parts underneath the hood are all generally the same. They're just selective. So if we can get as far as that, I think the opposite when it comes to architecture, the more you constrain the freedom of the architecture, the more I think the architect has to develop in terms of the solution. If there's full freedom, it can be anything, right? But if you're restricting that freedom in terms of that kit of parts, then it becomes something much different. How can you express yourself as an architect to make that happen? There's another thing before we get on to the last topic that I've also heard in the industry, and this relates for our quantity surveying friends out there, that now the quantity surveyor won't be needed because it's just one number volumetric type 1 or one number 50 number volumetric type 2, and that's it. We're done. Quantity surveyor job's over. What's your opinion on that, Pat? What have you seen in the industry, in the projects you've worked on? How have the quantity surveyors reacted to this MMC addition?
The role of the quantity surveyor will be negated, I think, actually, becomes more critically important in a sense, where certainly we componentize, MMC and be it 3D volumetric modular is still made up of components. Yeah. We need to identify those components, etc. There's a number of other aspects of, it's not just one number of this, one number of that, etc. And how do they go together, etc. And then we have the management and the contractual relationships, etc. Yeah. I think there's also more perhaps an opportunity, an evolving role for quantity surveying in terms of, if you have the data coming through of the various elements, and we spoke earlier about the benefits of carbon, etc. How can we drive that on using quantities and understanding, and how do you articulate the value perhaps of MMC? Will it be in the future? Will it be through financial, or is it actually moving towards carbon? Is the value towards carbon, particularly in investment, etc.? So I think it's an evolving role. I think certainly, as equally you could argue for architects. If we're moving into a kit of parts approach, and we're looking at AI coming down the line, and currently coming aboard, where you can get iterative designs in within seconds, automate drawing outputs, etc. So we could extend that on to say, can we just produce and print buildings, etc. So I think it's understanding the future, it's understanding the skills, and how do we move with that.
Again, there's the opportunity in change.
Absolutely.
We might not be able to identify it in the moment, but the opportunity is there. We just need to look hard enough. I do also think in the front end, you talked about the optioneering in that very early inception stage, where we're looking at options of alternative methods of construction, cost and carbon becomes vital in that stage as well, because no developer investor in the world is going to make a decision without understanding what the cost impact and, as you rightly said, what the carbon impact is going to be now. So the role is changing, but if we look at the adaptation of technologies and standardization and data and all of that, the opportunity to look at how we can increase optimization through data, again, is opportunity, opportunity, opportunity. So what needs to change or improve for MMC to be a success? What do we need to do as an industry or supply chain or whatever the case may be?
Sure. I think if we look at the construction industry, and it's not just in Ireland, but in general, very fragmented. We need to come together a little bit more. We need to, really articulate the benefits through all stakeholders. I think procurement is a big part of that. Yeah. The government needs to take a lead, I think, in terms of really 100%. Driving forward procurement, and that's challenging. That we have public procurement, and the challenges that will bring in regards to large scale construction, etc., and not just within Ireland. Obviously, there's EU regulations, etc. And then begin to understand, supply chain capacity as well, and feed that in through procurement. As an example, if we have a large scale public project procured through whatever means and delivering 3D volumetric modular, with a particular solution, what happens if that manufacturer and you're 50% way through the project and something happens in insolvency or whatever it is? Can we easily then flip to an alternative solution with 3D volumetric modular? Yeah. So all of those aspects need to be teased out, and I think we're through large scale frameworks. I think we can look at those and begin to articulate that, and then perhaps that will drive forward an increase in terms of supply chain capacity, particularly in 3D volumetric modular. Like I said, we have really good supply chain capacity in terms of 2D panelized at the moment, particularly in timber construction. And we're beginning to see it now in prefabricated concrete, precast concrete, etc. And
I'd also say let's not limit our perception and views into the UK. Let's look at Europe, what Europe are doing, and again, we'll say Scandinavia again, and other European countries. When we talk about carbon and the impact of carbon, a lot of people think that transportation is a huge aspect of carbon, and the reality, actually, it's not. It might be far, far better for us to get our volumetric from Spain than it would be maybe from the UK, for example, because of electrical production. Generally, that's where the carbon sits in terms of embodied carbon at the moment. It's energy at the end of the day. So Scandinavia being a very green producer of energy, their materials now will be much greener if manufactured up there. So again, lots of opportunity. But I like the point that you said government have to take lead. At the end of the day, they're the largest asset owner in the country. They're also the largest investor in the country. So it only makes sense that they would take lead in this and have pilot projects and pilot schemes and testing facilities, and us to work together as an industry rather than, again, the siloed approach of traditional construction, I think, will kind of force success in the MMC perhaps.
Absolutely. No, you're correct in a sense, that, and I think we're beginning to see that, with, like you said, construct innovation. We're now looking at perhaps, testing facilities here in Ireland, which we don't have at the moment, and, increased and understanding the benefits, a fantastic project carried out by Salford University recently in Manchester, where they built fully assembled units in a factory environment and tested them under extreme weather conditions to really articulate, what is happening within construction, within the actual construction methodologies, and understand that, and then bring all those together, feed that out through the industry, etc. And I think, but yeah, definitely procurement. I think we need to solve that.
And what about building regulations and certifications? Fire certs, for example, on material types and stuff like that. I hear a lot in the industry that's a huge challenge for MMC at the moment.
Yeah, and quite rightly so, in a sense. Obviously we have to ensure that any building is safe and safe for use through the design, through the construction, etc. But I think essentially what we're trying to do is take, in the most part, traditional materials and put them together in a factory and bring them to site, and how we do that and how we ensure that those are put together safely and properly, that we're not adding materials that are going to cause impacts on other materials, that they're built in, they're all aligned up with all the certification, that we have the awareness then in terms of inspecting in the factory as opposed to on site and understanding how that impacts inspection regimes, quality control, etc. And then when they come to site, that they're assembled correctly and that all necessary requirements, for example, fire barriers, etc., are all installed. I think and then it's bringing the industry along that journey, be it manufacturers, and understanding the role of the manufacturers in terms of responsibilities, etc. And then it's raising the awareness and understanding of MMC through the building control. And so an example of that would be mass timber construction. Mass timber construction not necessarily used here in Ireland to any great degree. However, I think we've had the first subgroup of a new government committee meeting just before Christmas last, to look and tease out how can we integrate mass timber construction within the industry, and understanding what are the challenges in terms of fire, etc. So again, all of those are coming through, and it's building the awareness through this entire supply chain, manufacturers, installers, the inspectors, etc., and tease those out and ensure that we have proper controls and measures in place to ensure that all of those assemblies are designed, built, manufactured and assembled correctly.
And I would say for modern methods of construction, most of what we're talking about today has been done elsewhere. Other countries, they're building in timber, they're building in volumetric, they're building in different material types. So it's not a case of we're reinventing the wheel here. What we're trying to do within the Irish industry is make it fit for purpose within our regulated process, I would say. So
absolutely.
The next steps. But Pat, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thanks very much for your time, and I hope everybody enjoyed the modern methods of construction. Thanks very much for listening. There's a LinkedIn link below in the show notes. We would love to connect with you.
We hope you enjoyed it and have you with us in the next one. Thank you very much.